Hi, I'm Dr. Jean Fourie, an educational psychologist and a lecturer in the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg. I'm narrating this presentation of the work of my PhD student, Mariam Muller, who is interrogating the literacy crisis in South African schools. South Africa has been part of the PIRLS Progress in International Reading Literacy study for a period of 15 years. During that time, South African fourth grade learners have continuously achieved the lowest reading literacy results in these studies. In 2011, 58% of these learners were unable to read for meaning. This rose to 78% in 2016 and 81% in 2021. These abysmal figures are despite curriculum statements that all learners should have acquired basic reading skills by the end of the third grade that would enable them to read to learn across all fourth grade and higher grade subjects. The PIRLS reports, upon which the previous figures are based, provide international comparative data about how well fourth grade learners from over 50 different countries read in their language of learning and teaching after 4 years of compulsory primary schooling. PIRLS also remains the only international comparative large-scale assessment study in South Africa that assesses the reading literacy acquisition of fourth grade learners in all 11 of our official languages and offers benchmark findings against international information for policy and practice. PIRLS 2021 is the only large-scale assessment that successfully collected data during the COVID-19 disruption in education. After the release of the PIRLS 2016 results of the South African fourth grade learners, the Minister of Education called for a root cause analysis to find the challenges around the reading literacy difficulties. A root cause analysis is an analysis to identify what and how a problem occurred, but also to identify why this problem has occurred. And this is the key to developing effective recommendations and interventions. Although extensive analysis of PIRLS data has been conducted by South African researchers, and there have been interventions at schools made by the Department of Education, such as the Primary School Reading Improvement Program and the Room to Read program, there is no evidence that a root cause analysis was carried out by the Department of Education as to why these abysmal reading results continue and persist over decades. Against this background, this study aimed to interrogate the PIRLS reports to verify whether effective recommendations were indeed rendered to mitigate the recurrence of the poor reading literacy achievements in the PIRLS cycles. Key findings were extracted from the PIRLS international and national reports chronologically from 2006 to 2021. Root cause analysis was deemed to be a suitable methodology for examining the recurrent and persistent poor literacy problem. We used 6 steps which were adapted from numerous researchers as a conceptual framework to conduct the root cause analysis. To simplify the root cause analysis process, we will outline how these 6 steps were conducted, whilst simultaneously discussing the key findings for each step. The problem was first bound geographically, politically, and economically in the South African primary school system. Thereafter, two predictive statements were constructed to gather evidence for the root causes of the problem. The first statement reads that learners may be lagging 6 years behind their international peers on the PIRLS overall reading literacy scales. The second statement we constructed is that these poor literacy results in comparison with other countries have often been attributed to the complexity of South Africa's language of instruction policies. Data from the PIRLS reports was collected to verify the predictive statements. In 2006, the fourth graders lagged approximately 5 school years behind the required scale center point of 500 and approximately 7 school years behind the Russian Federation, which was the top performing country that year. In 2011, fourth graders lagged approximately 1 school year behind the required scale center point and approximately 3 school years behind Hong Kong, the top performing country that year. In 2016, fourth graders lagged approximately 5 school years behind the required 500 scale center point and approximately 7 school years behind the Russian Federation, which was the top performing country that year. In 2021, fourth graders lagged approximately 5 school years behind the center point and 7.5 years behind Singapore, the top country. The PIRLS overall reading literacy scales provided evidence that South African fourth grade learners are indeed consistently lagging behind their international peers. This graph shows an overview of the 2021 results. South Africa ranked last of the 43 participating countries, despite our learners having 4 years of formal schooling and being of approximately the same age as children of the top performing countries. South African learners read 2 to 5 years behind children of other middle-income countries like Jordan, Egypt, Iran, and Brazil. We considered the second predictive statement, that the language of instruction policy is one of the root causes of the low literacy levels. In South Africa, all 11 languages are tested. Children are tested in whatever their own language of instruction is, from grades 1 to 3 in the school. For example, a child who speaks Zulu and has been taught in Zulu from grades 1 to 3 would read and write the test in Zulu. Over 12,000 fourth graders were assessed from 321 schools. Thus, the sample was nationally representative and was stratified by language and province. Despite being assessed in their home language, which is also the language of instruction in the 2021 PIRLS, 81% of fourth graders could not read for meaning, up from 78% in 2016. Thus, over 10,000 children were unable to read for meaning in any language by their fourth school grade. Fourth graders lack the most basic literacy skills. They were unable to recognize, locate, and reproduce information explicitly stated in the texts they read, particularly if the information was placed at the beginning of the text. They could not remember that information. They had difficulty answering comprehension questions and making straightforward inferences from the text content. South African children were given an easier version called the pre-PIRLS, which had simpler vocabulary, grammar, and syntax. The texts were easier and shorter, with less emphasis placed on higher order comprehension questions. Despite this, South Africa recorded the highest percentage of learners not reaching the lowest international benchmark. This indicates that these learners are unable to read independently, a skill which should be well established by the 4th grade. As in subsequent grades, learners are expected to use their reading ability to master subject content. Step 3 of root cause analysis requires a structured organization of the data gathered as evidence. We organize the factors around the systems influential in the child's life. We start with the home context. The first factor we examined was home resources. PIRLS notes that countries where parents reported many home resources for learning had much higher learning achievement than countries with few home resources. The second factor was early literacy activities, such as parents reading to the child daily, which has a positive effect on the child's later reading achievement. PIRLS notes that 39% of learners' parents often engaged them in early literacy activities, and these learners achieved higher reading scores. This was in the international results. In South Africa, PIRLS reported only 62% of learners sometimes did early literacy activities with their parents. Learners scored low where parents never engaged their children in early literacy activities. In the school context, a primary cause that South African 4th graders are lagging behind their international peers is that they do not acquire basic reading skills in 1st and 2nd grade. The same children that failed the PIRLS assessments in grade 4 failed basic fluency assessments in grade 2 and did not know all the letters and sounds of the alphabet by the end of grade 1. They are unable to read for meaning, as they did not acquire basic decoding skills. This fact is substantiated by more than 50 authors who note that learners who do not learn to read by the 2nd grade will not read to learn from the 3rd grade onward. Another cause is that the reception year is not yet compulsory, despite research stating the importance of pre-primary education for perceptual, cognitive, linguistic, social, and emotional development. Many children are thus not ready for formal schooling activities when they enter grade 1. Another primary cause of the poor literacy levels is the controversial language in education policy, which stipulates the language of learning and teaching which the school must follow. This policy recognizes South Africa as a multilingual society, but prescribes that the learner's home language is the most appropriate for instruction in the foundation phase. The policy also allows parents to choose the language in which their children should be educated, and overwhelmingly, parents choose English, which for the majority of learners is not their first or home language. Many teachers also find it challenging to teach in English, which is not their first language either, and there is insufficient instruction time for learners to acquire the second language. Learners who have been taught in their home language for the first 3 years of school find the transition to English as the language of instruction in the 4th grade extremely difficult. Additionally, the curriculum is prescriptive regarding content and teaching strategies, so teachers cannot modify their teaching to address the learner-specific needs. Other causes contributing to poor reading results relate to pervasive bullying in schools, high learner and teacher absenteeism, learners not doing homework activities, unprepared teachers, too much focus on lower order skills, inadequate reading books, and poor nutrition. These factors are all recorded in the PIRLS reports. Step 4 of root cause analysis requires the researcher to specify whether these causal factors are actionable or solvable causes that can be eliminated, reduced, or modified to address the problem. Regarding the root cause of minimal home resources for learning, this can be addressed in various ways. Parents can be encouraged to join community libraries. There are numerous organizations in South Africa where books and stationery are donated. Talks can be held to enlighten parents of their crucial roles in early literacy activities and homework monitoring. In Step 5, the recommendations were verified against actionable root causes, since it is crucial to understand why an event has occurred to develop effective actions. The South African PIRLS national reports maintain that recommendations can be actioned at school, district, or national level through existing bodies, processes, and policies. For the root causes relating to insufficient teaching time in the home languages, the Curriculum Assessment Policy Statement has clear guidelines for teaching literacy in the first and additional languages, and the importance of higher order reading comprehension skills are emphasized. Teachers should actively teach these comprehension skills, and the departmental heads should moderate that this teaching is done effectively. In Step 6, emerging gaps were highlighted and recommendations made to address the root causal factors. For example, the South African Department of Basic Education could make amendments to the notional teaching times outlined in the CAPs for home languages, so that reading instruction time at foundation and intermediate phases is increased to be consistent with the weekly time that top-performing countries in PIRLS spend on reading. Additionally, the National Reading Plan could include measures to enhance the 5 essential skills of reading instruction, namely phonemic awareness, word recognition, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Furthermore, early literacy skills of first graders should be screened to identify delays. The early grade reading assessment is an effective tool to determine deficits in the phonetic, decoding, and comprehension skills of first graders, so that early remediation can be implemented. The discussion of this root cause analysis centers around the second predictive statement, that the poor literacy results are attributed to the complexity of South Africa's language of instruction policies. This policy is built on an additive multilingualism approach, assuming that learners will be able to acquire phonics and reading skills of their home language first, and then build other languages easily upon the first language foundation. The policy allows children to learn 3 different languages: their home language and a first and second additional language. Children generally spend the first 3 grades learning in their home language and are then expected to transition to English in the 4th grade without having acquired the English phonemes, phonics, and vocabulary, which is very different to that of the indigenous Nguni languages, which most children speak, often resulting in language confusion. Additionally, English is an opaque language, where the relationship between letters and sounds are inconsistent, with many inconsistencies and irregularities, which take longer for second language learners to master. So in the 4th grade, children are effectively learning a new language and simultaneously required to learn complex subject matter in that language, a tall order indeed. We thus recommend a review of the policy to address the controversial issue that the home language of learners is the most appropriate for the language of teaching and learning, yet parents are allowed to choose the language in which their children should be educated. Furthermore, if parents choose English as the language of teaching, these learners must be allowed to learn English as both their home and first additional language in the foundation phase. This could lead to less confusion concerning phonics and vocabulary and allow for more language teaching time. In addition, we recommend that the reception year learners are taught English as an oral language, so they learn to hear and speak the language sounds. We also recommend special support for teachers and learners during the grade 4 transition period from the home language to English as the language of teaching and learning. Recommendations have been made to address the identified root causes of the literacy crisis in South Africa. We make an urgent appeal for critical policy reviews at National Department of Basic Education and school practice improvements in an attempt to prevent the recurrence of the abysmal reading literacy results. Current grade 2 learners who will be the 2026 PIRLS cohort need aggressive, intense literacy support to improve their reading levels. Otherwise, we predict the next PIRLS report will present similar devastating results. We agree with Nick Spall that national policy attention must be turned to what is happening in grade 1 and 2 classrooms that prevent the most basic literacy knowledge from being acquired. The continual low reading literacy results of South African fourth graders will have dire, long-lasting economic and social consequences for these learners and their communities.